In Lexington, Kentucky, a woman walked into the ER, dropped off her lifeless husband, then calmly drove home and went to sleep. The next day, she acted like nothing happened. But what happened inside that house changed everything. She stepped into the emergency room with the kind of stillness that draws attention, not because it was frantic, or rushed, or even particularly odd, but because of how quiet it was. A woman alone, driving through the cold Lexington streets at nearly midnight, bringing in the body of her husband. No panic. No questions. No emotion. Just one short sentence: "My husband's in the car." The nurses hurried out, thinking there might still be a chance. But when they reached the passenger seat, they froze. He wasn't clinging to life. He was already gone. No breath. It wasn't even close. And she was already turning to leave. No visible tears. No desperate explanation. Number 911 call ever made. Just the quiet hum of automatic doors sliding shut behind her as she walked back out and drove home. What happened after that was even more unsettling. Security footage showed her pulling into her driveway just 20 minutes later. Inside her two-story home, she changed out of the same clothes she'd worn to the hospital. Then, according to the timestamp on her delivery order, she opened her phone, selected her favorite Thai place, and ordered dinner. Pad CEW. Extra tofu. No spice. She ate. Alone. In silence. And then she went to sleep. The next morning, she answered a text from a friend about brunch plans. Smiled at a neighbor. Said hello to a mail carrier. Nothing was out of place. Until the coroner's report came in. Because Jordan Walker wasn't freshly deceased when he was wheeled into that hospital. The science was clear. The body had been lifeless for hours, maybe more. And there were marks. Small, almost invisible, but there. The kind that make investigators stop. The kind that don't belong to natural causes. He was 34. Healthy. No drugs in his system, at least not the kind prescribed to him. But there was something else, traces of a powerful sedative found only in controlled settings. The same kind Melissa Walker had access to as a home health nurse. This wasn't just a case of grief handled poorly. This wasn't confusion or shock. This was deliberate. And no one, not even those closest to them, had seen it coming. In a neighborhood filled with porch lights and polite conversations, where couples walked their dogs and holiday wreaths still hung on doors in late January, a man had died. And the woman who had shared his home, his meals, his bed, she didn't call for help. She didn't try to save him. She waited. Waited for the right hour. Waited for him to go cold. Then placed his body in the passenger seat, adjusted her rearview mirror, and drove. The question now wasn't whether he had died. The question was why. What happens inside a home, behind the drawn curtains and closed doors, when the person you trust most becomes the one who decides whether you live or die? Lexington police didn't know yet what they were walking into. And they had no idea that a simple hospital drop-off would lead them into one of the most baffling investigations their department had ever seen. This is the story of Jordan and Melissa Walker. A quiet couple. A quiet night. And a death that refuses to make sense. It began like most stories of quiet domestic life do, routine, structured, uneventful on the surface. Jordan and Melissa Walker had lived in the Wellington neighborhood of Lexington, Kentucky, for almost 6 years. Their house sat at the corner of a cul-de-sac, trimmed hedges out front, 2 matching sedans in the driveway, wind chimes near the back door that clinked softly when the wind rolled in from the east. Jordan worked from home, tech support for a financial software firm out of Chicago. Long hours on the computer, short conversations with colleagues, mostly email. He liked bourbon, college basketball, and listening to true crime podcasts while cooking dinner. Melissa, on the other hand, spent her days on the move. She was a home health nurse for elderly patients in Fayette County. Everyone described her the same way: polite, punctual, neat. A woman who kept her calendar full and her private life silent. They didn't have children. Friends would say they weren't the type. Always polite, always composed, but never quite warm. Even the neighbors, who exchanged waves with them every morning, couldn't recall ever being invited inside. Still, no one suspected anything was wrong. No fights loud enough to draw attention. No police visits. No late night yelling through thin walls. Just a married couple in their 30s with a well-manicured lawn and a dog named Marley, who hadn't been seen much in the days leading up to the incident. The first official report came from Baptist Health Hospital's emergency room logbook. A woman entered the building at 11:42 p.m., walked to the triage desk, and said her husband needed help. She gave her name. Her address. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. When staff followed her outside, they found Jordan in the passenger seat, fully reclined. His eyes were open. His shirt damp with sweat. But he was gone. No vital signs. No effort to resuscitate. His body was stiffening. The staff immediately notified the coroner's office and local law enforcement. Melissa had already left the hospital before police arrived. By morning, the story had started to spread. Quietly at first, among nurses, hospital staff. Something didn't feel right. But there was no cause for an arrest. Not yet. Detectives from the Lexington Police Department were assigned to follow up. Standard procedure. A wellness check. They visited the Walker residence just before noon. Melissa answered the door wearing a cardigan and slippers. Calm. Cooperative. She said she was resting. Said she hadn't slept all night. They asked when she last saw Jordan alive. She said late the previous evening, maybe around 9. Said he hadn't been feeling well. She didn't mention calling an ambulance. She didn't explain why she didn't try CPR. When asked why she didn't call 911, she simply said, "I panicked." The officers noted her tone. Flat. Unemotional. They asked if they could look around. She agreed. Inside, the home was clean. Too clean. The smell of bleach still lingered in the kitchen. A slow cooker had been scrubbed and dried on the counter. A single plate was drying in the rack. In the bedroom, Jordan's phone sat on the nightstand, still charging. His wedding ring was placed in a bowl beside it. His shoes were by the bed, neatly aligned. On the dresser, a used syringe. No label. No packaging. Just placed there like an afterthought. That's when they called in forensics. As the coroner's report came in, the case began to change. Jordan had lorazepam in his system, an anti-anxiety medication, strong, fast-acting, dangerous in high doses. Melissa had access to it through her patients. But Jordan wasn't prescribed anything like it. The dose found in his bloodstream was fatal. Bruising around his jawline and on the inside of his left arm suggested restraint. The kind of marks you don't get from fainting. The kind of marks you get from someone holding you down. Melissa's work records confirmed she had checked out the medication days earlier. Signed under her initials. Logged it for a patient who was later confirmed to have refused medication that week. That's when police obtained a search warrant. The contents of Melissa's phone told a more intricate story. There were texts between her and an ex-boyfriend, a man she had reconnected with on Facebook months before. At first, the messages were innocent. A catch-up. A few jokes. Then photos. Late-night conversations. A plan to meet. One message stood out. "I'm done pretending. I don't want this life anymore." Jordan's bank account showed a transfer, $30,000 moved into a private savings account Melissa had opened just 3 weeks before his death. And there was more. A Google search history, painless ways to make someone sleep, how long does lorazepam stay in the system, and how to get rid of sedative evidence. The last entry was made at 10:12 p.m., barely an hour before she walked into the ER. Investigators brought her in for questioning. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She denied everything. Said she had no reason to hurt her husband. Said they had a quiet life. Said she didn't know what happened to him. But as the timeline came together, the picture was clearer than her answers. Jordan had last been seen alive by his coworker on a video call at 4:37 p.m. He mentioned feeling tired. Said he was going to take a nap. That was the last time anyone heard from him. Melissa's phone showed no activity between 5 p.m. and 8:22 p.m. But a motion detector in the hallway of their home, synced to the security system, showed heavy movement during that window. At 9:14 p.m., she opened the garage. At 9:15, she closed it. At 11:42, she walked into the hospital alone. When asked to account for the missing hours, she simply said she had been distracted. No confession came that day. No tears. Just silence. But the district attorney had enough. Melissa Walker was charged with second-degree murder. Her trial began 6 months later. The courtroom was packed, neighbors, friends, press. The defense argued emotional trauma. Claimed she had snapped under the weight of a loveless marriage. But there were no reports of abuse. No signs of violence. No friends who could confirm she had ever expressed fear of her husband. Only one person spoke on her behalf, her mother, who said, "Melissa's always been controlled. She doesn't show emotions like other people. That doesn't mean she's guilty." The prosecution's case was airtight. The forensic timeline. The medication trace. The financial motive. The affair. The searches. The jury deliberated for just under 3 hours. Guilty. She didn't flinch when the verdict was read. She was sentenced to 25 years in a Kentucky correctional facility. No parole for at least 20. In the months that followed, friends of Jordan created a memorial fund in his name. A scholarship. A park bench. A candlelight vigil. The neighborhood was never quite the same after that. Some say they still hear Marley barking at night in that backyard, even though the dog was rehomed long ago. The house sold quietly. A new family moved in, unaware of the history. But the records remain. So do the court transcripts. So does the evidence. Jordan Walker never raised a hand. Never called for help. Never thought the woman he kissed every morning would be the last person he ever saw. And Melissa, she never said why. Not in the courtroom. Not in jail. Not in any letter. She just went to sleep. In the months after the trial, the case of Melissa and Jordan Walker began to fade from headlines, but the details clung to the people who had seen it unfold up close. For the detectives, for the nurses who stood in that ER parking lot waiting for a miracle that never came, for the neighbors who remembered watching her mow the lawn 2 days later, calm, methodical, unbothered, it never truly ended. There was always the question no one could answer. Why? She had the house. She had the job. She had no history of violence, no psychiatric red flags, no abuse claims to hide behind. There were no bruises on her own body. No diaries filled with desperation. No protective orders. She was meticulous in everything she did, from her nursing charts to the way she folded Jordan's shirts. Even the crime, if you could call it that, had been methodical. Calculated. Quiet. But it wasn't perfect. The details that unraveled her story weren't born from carelessness. They were born from the assumption that no one would ever look. That people would believe the simplest version. That a man had died, and a woman didn't know what to do. But people did look. Closely. The surveillance footage from her neighbor's driveway, for instance, showed her struggling to move Jordan's body to the car. She had wrapped him in a blanket. Not out of affection, but to keep the blood from staining the leather seats. Later, investigators matched the thread count on the blanket to one from their guest bedroom closet. That set had never been used before. She had planned ahead. The text messages from her phone revealed gaps, conversations deleted, entire threads missing. But forensic analysts recovered fragments from her cloud backup. Conversations with the same man from Facebook, growing more intimate over time. I wish I could start over. I'm tired of being invisible. What if I didn't have to wait anymore? He never responded to those last few messages. When he was subpoenaed, he testified under oath that he never encouraged her to leave her husband, and certainly never hinted at violence. He said, in fact, that she had become clingy, unstable. That he had blocked her weeks before the murder. His name was cleared, but his statement raised a new question: had she done it for someone who had already walked away? The prosecution didn't speculate about motive beyond the facts: financial gain, emotional detachment, and an opportunity she believed would go unchallenged. But beneath all of that, there was something colder. Something harder to name. Melissa's psychiatric evaluation, sealed during trial but later released under court order, showed no diagnosable disorder. No history of trauma. Her IQ ranked in the high percentile. She was clinically sound. Emotionally flat. Her answers short. Her memory sharp. When asked why she hadn't tried to resuscitate Jordan, she answered, "I didn't think it would matter." When asked why she didn't call for help immediately, she said, "I needed time to think." When asked if she had considered any other options, she paused and said, "What would have changed?" There were no apologies. No justifications. No theatrics. Just cold logic wrapped in a neutral tone. The investigators who worked the case said she was the calmest person they'd ever interviewed. Not evasive. Not angry. Just quiet. The aftermath reached far beyond the courtroom. Jordan's parents, who lived just 2 counties over in Richmond, filed a wrongful death suit. They won. Melissa's home was sold to pay the settlement. The scholarship in Jordan's name was expanded. His college, Eastern Kentucky University, honored him posthumously with a digital memorial on campus. And yet, despite everything, Melissa refused every interview request that came her way. No books.no documentaries.no confessions, just silence. Even in prison, she remained a curiosity. Inmates reported that she kept to herself, took every job she was given, and rarely spoke more than a sentence at a time. She never cried. She never wrote letters. She never accepted visitors. The correctional officers at the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women said the same thing. She's just, still. The lead detective, now retired, once told a local paper that the case haunted him. Not because of the horror, but because of the calm. "I've seen rage," he said. "I've seen people lose control. But I've never seen someone be so steady in the face of what they did." She didn't make a mistake. She made a choice. And so, the story lives on, quietly, like the way she walked into that hospital. A woman in her 30s, with no history of crime, driving her husband's body through the empty streets of Lexington, placing him at the doors of the ER like a package being dropped off, then going home, and sleeping. There were no screams. No blood-stained walls. No frantic neighbors dialing 911. Just a house. A car. A woman. And a man who would never speak again. In a world filled with warning signs and heated arguments, Melissa gave none. She simply waited until no one was watching. And then she stopped pretending. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened between the hours of 4 and 8 that evening. No one knows what was said. Whether Jordan realized what was happening. Whether he begged. Whether he fought. Or whether he trusted her, right up to the end. What we do know is this. He went to sleep, thinking he'd wake up, and she made sure he didn't. 3 years passed. The story that once captured headlines in Kentucky drifted into obscurity, swallowed by time and the steady rhythm of new tragedies. But within certain circles, criminal psychologists, cold case units, and true crime followers, the case of Melissa Walker lingered like a riddle never fully solved. Her silence had become part of the narrative. There were no appeals filed, no interviews granted, no memoirs penned from prison. Just a woman serving out her sentence, as expressionless as she had been in court, never uttering a word about what really happened the night Jordan Walker died. But silence, like still water, eventually stirs. It began when a former cellmate of Melissa's was released early on parole and gave an anonymous tip to the Department of Corrections. The woman, who had served time on unrelated charges, claimed Melissa had spoken more than anyone realized. Late nights. Whispered words. Stories she never told anyone else. Her identity was eventually confirmed, and under pressure, she agreed to an official recorded statement. According to her account, Melissa had admitted to administering a dose of lorazepam into a drink, calmly waiting until Jordan grew tired, then walking him to the bedroom. There was no argument. No fight. She told him she loved him. Tucked him in. Then sat beside the bed for over an hour as his breathing slowed. She didn't inject him. She didn't strike him. She simply waited. And when the drug stopped his heart, she waited longer. Not to grieve. Not to panic. But to clean. To prepare. She laid out his clothes. Removed his wallet. Checked his pulse more than once, not out of guilt, but to be sure. Then she drove. And when asked why a woman with no prior record, no history of violence, no signs of desperation, would commit such a quiet, brutal act, Melissa reportedly said 5 words. Because no one ever saw me. The cellmate's statement opened an internal review. Investigators revisited records, searched for any corroborating details, and confirmed multiple inconsistencies that had never been presented in court. For one, Jordan's life insurance policy had recently been increased, by Melissa. The documentation bore his signature, but the handwriting analyst suggested a potential forgery. There wasn't enough evidence to press new charges, but it added to the psychological profile they had only begun to piece together. Dr. Elaine Cotter, a forensic psychologist who reviewed the transcript, later described Melissa's case as an emotional vacancy camouflaged as control. She wasn't angry. She wasn't passionate. She wasn't even cold in the traditional sense. She was tired of being unseen, unheard. It wasn't the presence of hate that caused this murder. It was the total absence of connection. And in her silence, Melissa had forced the world to fill in the blanks. Some speculated Jordan had been emotionally distant. Others believed Melissa had suffered in ways she never revealed, quiet belittling, dismissals, the erosion of her identity behind the routine of their life together. But there were no written accusations. No visible bruises. Only one woman's invisible unraveling. Jordan's friends refused to accept that he had been anything but kind. They described him as patient, funny, a little absent-minded but never cruel. A man who loved jazz, grilled steak on Sundays, and was proud of finally finishing his landscaping. He didn't hit her. He didn't leave. He just became inconvenient. Melissa's family remained publicly silent. Her parents relocated to a rural town in Indiana, sold their home in Lexington, and refused all interview requests. The house where Jordan had lived and died was purchased by a young couple from out of state. They didn't know the story until their mailbox started filling with letters, curious strangers, true crime fans, asking questions they couldn't answer. Eventually, they moved. The new owners remodeled the interior, tearing up the carpets, replacing the countertops. But the neighbors still remember. They remember the ambulance. The police tape. The silent woman in slippers answering the door with eyes that looked through people, not at them. Jordan's grave sits at the edge of the Lexington Cemetery, shaded by old maple trees. His tombstone reads, "He was kind. He was steady. He never saw it coming. Every year on the anniversary of his death, someone leaves a single red carnation at the foot of his headstone. No one has ever seen who does it. The security cameras in the cemetery show only shadows. Back at the correctional facility, Melissa continued her silence. No visitors. No outbursts. She worked in the library, shelved books, ate alone. A woman who refused to cry, but never stopped telling the truth in the smallest, sharpest ways. She never begged. She never screamed. She never asked for a second chance. She just waited. For someone to finally look closer. And maybe now, years later, we're all starting to. What do you think truly happened that night? Was Melissa Walker a silent victim, pushed too far by a man living double lives, or was she always capable of calmly ending the life of someone she once vowed to love? Was justice really served? Or did the truth die with Jordan? We want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Melissa acted out of revenge, or out of something deeper? If this story gripped you like it gripped us, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more true crime breakdowns, and share this video with someone who needs to see it. We've only just scratched the surface, and next time, we'll take you even deeper into the cases you can't stop thinking about. Your theory might be the one that finally cracks the silence. See you in the next one.